The Vault is brought to you by Saltire Energy, who continue to lead the way in the oil industry when it comes to specialist equipment rental. By Lux Scott, a jet-class luxury vehicle company. If you're looking to travel to any event in style, my suggestion is you look these guys up. By Fowler and Mackenzie, established in 2001, here for all your roofing and cladding needs. And finally, by HCS, a Scottish engineering company who for the last 20 years has built a huge reputation for manufacturing high quality, bespoke equipment for the oil industry. Hi everybody, a very warm welcome to episode 2 of The Vault. This is a very simple format. If you missed the first episode with David Priest, this is where I have taken all my old Zoom interviews, which I conducted during the pandemic, which was for my old written blog page. And what I've done is I've re-edited them and I've repackaged them, and now here they are as brand new video presentations. For episode 2, delighted to welcome to The Vault former winger Ben Thornley. Ben signed for Aberdeen on the 2nd of August 2001. In what was a frustrating 18-month period for the former class of 92 graduate, Ben only played 35 games for the club, scoring 5 goals. Here is his Aberdeen Football Club story. Talk us through how your move to Aberdeen came about.
So it was, I just left Huddersfield, and although I had a few offers, it sort of got to the stage where, I'm not saying that they dried up, but the contact with different clubs had become a little bit sparse. And I was getting to the stage where I was slightly worried, but I was going away on holiday anyway. And one of the places I was going to was Malta. I've got a big affiliation with Malta right from the early days of when I was at United. And Gary Neville had a soccer school out there, and I was going over to help him run it. And just probably about 2 or 3 days before the end of it finishing, I got a phone call from a guy that was representing me at the time and said that Alan Pardew wanted me to go to Reading and do like a pre-season with him in view to maybe a permanent move and a contract. So I went down. He was the manager along with Martin Allen, who everybody knows, famous footballing family. Absolutely loved my time down there. I thought it was pretty much nailed on that he was going to sign me. After 2 weeks of pre-season, and I think we had a game against Charlton at the end of it all, I went back on that Friday evening with Alan Pardew's voice in my ear telling me that, he would obviously call me once he'd spoken to the chairman. Anyway, I didn't hear anything, and in the interim, the chief scout at Aberdeen had called me at home, funnily enough, that Friday when I got back from London playing in this game at Charlton, and said, listen, can you fly up tomorrow to Aberdeen? I flew up to Aberdeen, and they were actually kicking their season off that afternoon. So it was with a view to training on the Sunday morning after the game, training on the Monday, and then there was a friendly at Arbroath on the Tuesday that was for trialists and people that needed a game, etc. So they lost the opening game at Pittodrie to Rangers 3-0. And I trained on the Sunday, trained on the Monday. And then when the game came round on the Tuesday, I actually felt great because the pre-season that I'd done with Reading, although it obviously came to nothing, it really, really helped me. And we played at Arbroath. I scored one and won a penalty in the second half. And we had a French trialist. And I'll always remember because the following day, the headline in the local Aberdeen newspaper, I forget what it was called.
Press and Journal.
Yeah, the Press and Journal, exactly. It went with the headline about me scoring, but also a sort of sub-headline with the French trialist who I had actually let take the penalty because they put me forward to do it. His name was Lionel Pratt. So
No.
and you can imagine what the headline went with. So on the strength of that, he missed the penalty. I think he put it into the river at at the back. He actually cleared the stand with it. And on the strength of that, Ebbe Skovdahl, I went up to see him in his office the following morning, on the Wednesday morning, and he was suitably impressed enough to give me a 2-year contract. And I had no hesitation once I'd dealt with the legalities and the contract stuff. I was really, really happy with it. And that was going to be I was 26 at the time. That was going to be the first time I'd ever actually moved away from Manchester and been on my own.
Did you speak, just out of interest, did you speak to Sir Alex before you decided to sign the contract?
Do you know what? I didn't know, but there were plenty of people, because obviously he was an absolute legend up in Aberdeen with the way that he'd wrestled back the championship from the old firm in his time that he was there. And I subsequently found out that there were so many people that Sir Alex knew. And as you know, Aberdeen is a very small place, which obviously we'll come on to later. So even though I didn't actually speak to him before I'd signed the contract, because there was so little time for me to be able to make up my mind, I was already up in Aberdeen. They'd offered me the contract. And with the fact that the season was already up and running, there was no way that I was going to turn around and say to Aberdeen that, give me a couple of days to think about it. I spoke to my parents, and straight away I'd signed, so I didn't have time to do it. But I did have contact with him afterwards, and he obviously sent me his best wishes and hoped that I'd do well up there.
Great. When you first went up and you started training, and then when you signed and then you're doing proper training, full-time training, did you notice a big difference in standards to what you had been used to at Manchester United?
I think there's always going to be a difference in standard when you leave Man United. I mean, the transition wasn't that massive, because I'd come from Huddersfield, and that's no disrespect to either of the two clubs. But when you think about the calibre of player that I was training with then at Manchester United, who I'd grown up through the ranks with during the class of '92, and if you throw into the mix the likes of Roy Keane, Dennis Irwin, Gary Pallister, obviously Ryan Giggs, Lee Sharp, the list of names that you're training with day in, day out is endless in terms of the star quality that they had and the number of championships that they'd already won. So when you are actually training with those people day in, day out, it just makes you realise what sort of a standard you have to reach to play at that sort of a level. So there's always going to be a slight drop in standard, because Man United were, they just won the Champions League, not a couple of years prior to that in '99 when they won the infamous treble. They'd won countless championships already in the Premier League. And obviously that's stood me in good stead for wherever I was going to go. But after the injury that I had, I very, very quickly realised that I was perhaps always going to fall a little bit short of the standard needed to compete at that level, and in a really, really tough season in the competitions they were going to be playing in, and the calibre of teams that they were going to be facing. And when you are talking about that top level, Ali, it's a very, very fine line between, it's tiny margins, and you have to be constantly at that top level. And after my injury, I was just never quite there. So the standard was very, very comfortable for me, don't get me wrong, but it didn't mean that I didn't have to work and I didn't have to prove where I had come from to make people realise that I actually was quite still a decent footballer.
Okay, that's interesting, because you covered the bit about your knee injury there. So, but let me ask you another question about your knee. So, Did it ever worry you when you went into games that potentially the injury could flare up, something could happen? Did it make you change your game psychologically because you were always maybe thinking about the knee?
I think that was certainly true when I was still at Manchester United, because the injury happened in 1994, and obviously I didn't leave until 98 to go to Huddersfield, and then I didn't arrive at Aberdeen until 2001. So I think I can safely say that the psychological element of certainly the same injury happening again, I'd evaporated. I wasn't thinking about that. I think I would just be exactly the same as everybody else, that you're going out to play in a physical game and there are always chances. And you're susceptible to things like that happen to me, that you're going to get hit with a bad challenge. But I don't feel as though by that time it was affecting me mentally. There were certain things that I was aware of. I was a slightly more angry person. A lot of people, I mean, you spoke to David Priest, he would say that I was completely the opposite. But I think privately there were always quite a few sort of demons inside me where I always felt, not bitter, that's not the right word. I just felt as though somebody had taken away the potential that I might have had to make it at the top level. And I felt a little bit hard done by and a little bit cruel. And to a certain extent, probably felt a little bit sorry for myself. And again, it probably didn't creep that much into my time at Huddersfield and Aberdeen, but it certainly did while I was at Manchester United. And I use the term bitter, absolutely never comes into contention with the lads that I grew up with and that I saw go on and have absolutely fabulous careers. Because despite what happened to me, and it's a question I get asked a lot, that didn't affect me at all. If anything, I went to the final in 1999 and I was at the party at the hotel afterwards when they'd won it. And I was one of the first people to congratulate the lads that I'd certainly grown up with and had seen achieve what they've done that season particularly. And I couldn't have been more happy for them. And that's not to say that I'd love to have been in their shoes as well, but there was no bitterness because, like I said, despite what happened to me, they were always going to go on and have fabulous careers, and that's exactly what they did. In terms of physically, obviously, I based my game on being a quick player, and although I was still, I had a still element of speed in my game. It was that sort of short, sharp burst off the mark, which again, I was talking before about the fine margins. I had that before my injury, there's no question. But it's like anything, if you break something and piece it back together, it's never, ever quite as efficient and effective as it was before it was broken. And I just could not get back to that level where I could compete at the level that Manchester United would require. So although I didn't alter my game, I always realised that the element of speed, if I had somebody that was as quick as I was, I needed to alter my game. And that wasn't as much of an issue for me because I always grew up playing with 2 feet, and whereas you get some players that are very, very one-footed and can only go one way, I was quite confident that with my low centre of gravity and the fact that I could use 2 feet, that it wouldn't have affected me as much.
Was there ever a time, even before you joined Aberdeen, maybe when you were at Huddersfield or you were training at Reading, was there ever a time when you felt a bit of pressure? Because maybe your peers who didn't know about your injury, didn't know that you suffered that horrific knee injury, did you feel peer pressure to be able to emulate the guys that you'd been training with and the guys that you grew up with when you went to these clubs?
I suppose subconsciously I did. I think when you arrive from a club like Manchester United, I think there are certain expectations of you as an individual. Certainly there's expectations of you to fit into a team, both in and out of the dressing room. And I don't think that wherever I went subsequently from Manchester United, I ever had a problem doing that. But there were on numerous occasions when I always felt as though I still had plenty to offer, and there were times when I just didn't deliver at all. There were times at Huddersfield, there were certainly times at Aberdeen, there were times when I went to Blackpool, even when I went further down the spectrum. I was always aware that, Ben, you used to play at Man United, you should be performing better than this. And I had to, do a lot of soul searching and dig a lot deeper as to the reasons why that may not be happening. And I probably always came back to the fact that I didn't live my life as a professional footballer should have been at certain times. And the times when I wasn't performing, they always seemed to coincide when I'd let myself go a little bit. and that disappoints me. And I know that, you know, whenever I've done these podcasts, people will say, you know, what would you ever have done differently? And again, we'll probably get onto that, but that is certainly one of the biggest regrets that I have, is that at times during my career, I wasn't professional enough, and I didn't just let myself and my family down, but I let my teammates down as well, and that saddens me.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll digress on that a little bit later. When you first arrived in Aberdeen, tell me, what were your first impressions of the city and the club?
Fabulous city. I was actually shown around the city by Jim Leighton.
Were
so
you?
that was great. That was great for me. He picked me up from the airport and he took me to the hotel, and he showed me, as you know, and I've already mentioned, Aberdeen is the city centre is a very small place. Union Street runs from one end to the other, and wherever you need to go in Aberdeen, you don't ever have to go that far. That has its downsides, it being a small place, as you can probably imagine. but yeah, Jim, great bloke, gave me the opportunity to you know, discuss things about Manchester United. I love spending time with Jim. He's a real gentleman and a lovely bloke to speak to, and a very knowledgeable guy as well. So that helped to start with. And whenever you know, you sort of integrate, you do always get the feeling that, you know, are there going to be some players that sort of shun you a little bit because you used to be at Man United, and they don't really know what to expect of you, and are they expecting you to turn up being a bit of a big time Charlie type of thing? I've never done that in my career. I have met people who have done that to me without good reason, but one of the instances that I can give you is when I signed for Huddersfield. There was a lad there who was a centre half, a real sort of one of the hardest people I've ever met in football, a lad called Andy Morrison, who came up. Do you remember him? Yeah,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
He came up signed from Plymouth Argyle to Blackburn Rovers with a guy called Nicky Marker, who was the guy who did my knee in 1994.
Yeah.
So they knew each other really well. Now Jock, as everybody calls him, Andy Morrison, I didn't want to get on the wrong side of him at all, and anybody that knows him would understand why. But he was absolutely brilliant with me. He knew Nicky Marker really well. I was really wary about how he would take to me. But one of the first things he did when we went on our first pre-season my first pre-season to the Isle of Man in 1998 was sort of pull me to one side, because he was the club captain at the time, and just said, "Listen, you know, I'm sorry about what happened to you. Yes, I know Nicky Marker, but I just want you to know that there's going to be I judge everybody basically on individuals and who they are." And that, when you're talking about how you find places, that just made me exhale unbelievably, and just gave me the sort of lift that I needed, if you like. Number one, when you're signing for a new club, and number two, when you have got a real underlying issue that you were fully aware might knock you a little bit. But Jock was absolutely brilliant with me. And the lads at Aberdeen were the same. I think I can remember that the day after they'd lost 3-0 to Rangers in the first game, Stuart Mill, who had this fabulous house out in the sticks in Aberdeen, as he did every year, it was a tradition for him to invite everybody into his home, and they had a barbecue on the Sunday afternoon. So that was where after I finished doing the training session, that was where I went, and it was actually Precy who came over to me, and you know what it's like when they all know each other, and you sort of hanging back a little bit. And Precy said, you know, come over here and join us, and from then on in, it was a very, very easy dressing room with some absolutely fabulous lads. It really was.
Great. So you officially signed on the 2nd of August 2001, and then only 2 days later you made your debut against Hearts, which we lost 1-0. But you played particularly well in that game. So did you think that the way that Aberdeen were playing at the time under Ebbe would have suited your game?
It didn't at all. It
Really?
didn't at all. He had a very sort of individual style of wanting his wide players to do things that just I just couldn't fathom them out at all. He was obsessed with, when the ball was on the other side, that the opposite winger wanted him to fly across the near post for crosses coming in.
Okay.
And apart from it being a real lung buster as well, which you wouldn't expect, I mean, I can understand that you would want wide players getting in at the back post and not hanging outside the area. But having to make, sort of 60, 70-yard runs across the near post was almost unheard of. And he was quite adamant that this was a really good way of moving markers and making yourself get into good positions to score goals. But the number of times that didn't come to fruition, and the goalkeeper would pick the ball up or the ball would be cleared and it'd go straight out to the side that you just vacated, and then you had to make another lung busting run back, and you actually looked as though you were constantly caught in no man's land. Over a small period of time, he did actually change the way that he was thinking, because we were starting to produce results. I know we lost our first 3 games of the season at home to Rangers, and then in Edinburgh to both Hearts and Hibs. So we probably would have been sitting rock bottom after 3 games. And in my first start against Motherwell back at Pittodrie, I think I scored the opening goal, and we won 4-2. And from then on in, we went on a really, really, incredible run right the way through till about the end of November, of which I was very much a part of at Pittodrie. But what was very strange, even though I'd come in and I'd scored a couple of goals, he tended to leave me out of the games away from home, which I just found extremely strange. And I became very, very close to John Sharp, who was the physio at the time. I very often used to go to his house for dinner, and we'd go out and have a few drinks together along with a couple of the other lads. And he couldn't explain why I was being picked for the home games and left out for the away games. And I for a while, I just took it that he wanted to maybe be a little bit more defensive, but the players that he was replacing me with weren't defensive at all. And not only that, I remember going through a spell where I was playing really well, and Robbie Winters on the other flank, who's a great, great guy, by the way. I had a lot of great times with Robbie. He wasn't performing at all, but he was staying in the side, whereas I was being dropped to the bench. And that grated on me a little bit. And although I didn't really... Ebbe Skovdahl, it was a really nice guy. He wasn't the type of manager, because of his mannerisms, that you could go to and actually get any answers from. It was basically, this is the way I'm doing it. And the lads told me before I got there that his assistant, Tommy Muller-Nielsen, who was there, they got to a stage whereby when they were on the training field, one of them was on one side and one was on the other, because they just didn't agree at all with the philosophy, with Ebbe's philosophy. Tommy just didn't agree with it. And it ended up him walking away from the club because the atmosphere was becoming toxic. Now, that was before I was there. And by the time I got there, Gardner Spears was the assistant manager, who, again, I got on really well with. So, yeah, it was a bit of an annoying time for me, really, because when you're performing, you want to be in the team all the time, especially if you're weighing in with a goal or two and you're creating chances. And yet there were players in the team that weren't performing as well as me, that were keeping their place, and I was being dropped. So I found that particularly hard to take certainly in the first 6 months I was there.
Can I just elaborate a little bit on when you said about he's not the type of guy that you would bang on your door, or you would go and bang on it? Did you feel like banging on his door though and asking what was going on?
Yeah, I did. I just mentioned to you there about players that weren't performing.
Yeah.
And there was one particular game where I never ever got complacent. I nebe walked into a dressing room. I mean, obviously, if I'd scored the previous game, then there was 90% of me expected that there would be a starting position for me in the following game, unless, and again, this is something that he never did, which I have experienced with pretty much any other manager that I've been with, is that if you were going to be left out, you would be taken to one side and explained the reasons why. Ebbe Skovdahl never did that. And I think it got to the stage where after 3 or 4 times of this happening, and I wasn't really being given an explanation as to why. I mean, if he did do that and he did give me a reason, and at least it would give me the opportunity to, A, understand what it was that I was doing wrong, and B, for me to rectify that, but be given the chance to do that by playing. But that never happened. And there was one particular game, and I forget who it was that we just played and who we were going into. And I fully expected to be part of the starting lineup, and I wasn't. And it really grated on me. It did. And I certainly remember the day before in training on the Friday, I had an absolutely storming training session. And I just felt like saying, if you're not going to play me tomorrow, this is sort of what you're missing out on. And nothing changed, obviously. But there was a time when, at that particular time, when I just felt, I need to go and find the reason why. Because if I'm doing something wrong that he's not picking me for these away games, I need to know what it is so that I can A, argue the toss, or B, accept and take on board what he's saying and rectify it.
But he never did.
Never did. No, never did.
Okay, so when you do go back into the side, be it whether you start or be it come off the bench, how difficult is it to find a level of consistency knowing you're in 1 minute, out the next?
Yeah, that is the key, is consistency. It doesn't just affect you physically because obviously you're in one game and you're out the other, or you maybe miss 2 games and then you're brought back in again. It affects you mentally as well. And not to the stage where I'm thinking about any sort of injuries, but you're thinking to yourself, well, you're doing everything that you can do. I wasn't injured. I was training every day. I always trained to the best of my abilities. I didn't shirk anything that was asked of me. And yet it is a real sort of soul destroyer when you find that the team or the squad to travel is not including you in the starting lineup. And that is really difficult because I think no matter who you are in football, no matter who you are in life, if you feel as though you're appreciated and that you're wanted, if you like, then your confidence, you just exude it, and it really, really helps you. But when you feel as though you're doing the best that you can possibly do, and you're not being given the chance to prove that by playing on a Saturday or whenever the games may fall, you do start to question yourself, especially when you're not getting any explanation from either the manager or the coaching staff. And I took it upon myself to go and speak to Stuart Hogg, who was the fitness coach at the time, if you like.
Yeah.
And I remember that when the Twin Towers happened in September of 2001, I had gone out with Stuart in an afternoon on my own to the local running track and was doing a little bit on my own with him, because I thought, if I'm going to be sort of, to a level where I'm not going to even be considered to be being left out if I'm performing, I just want to make sure that I keep that up. I want to make sure that the coaching staff can see that I'm doing that little bit extra to make sure that I do stay in the team. So, that did grate on me a little bit. And I never, apart from that first sort of couple of months, I never really got the opportunity after the first sort of 6-7 games, like you've already pointed out. I never really got the opportunity to have a run of games where I could really get a level of consistency and obviously a level of fitness, which is always going to help you. Did
you ever seek solace with maybe any of your teammates, your parents, people away from the club who were maybe not affiliated with the club? Did you ever sort of speak to anybody about these issues?
No, and perhaps at the time I should have done. It was a little bit strange for me as well, because obviously it was the first time that I was living on my own in an apartment in Aberdeen, and that would have been, Ali, the best thing for me to have done was to have spoken to people. I completely went the other way, and I decided that I was on my own. There were always people that were willing to go out. There were people that in Aberdeen that I'd met and that I'd become quite good friends with. They were always willing to go out. And instead of knuckling down and maybe continuing to do that bit of extra work that I was doing with Stuart Hogg, even though I continued that, I realised that there was more that I could have done. And certainly by, staying in the evening and staying out of the pubs and what have you, that probably would have been, again, the best thing for me to have done at the time, was to have spoken to somebody and got somebody's advice and just sort of took me away from that I'm going to go out and I'm just going to forget about it. I shouldn't have done that.
Is that where the anger comes in, do you think?
Yes, it's very possibly, yeah. That's very possibly, because anybody will tell you that, and anybody that does it, going out and having a laugh and having a drink is absolutely brilliant. But then you've got to wake up again the next day and you've got to go through the same cycle. And you know what you do. You know what you're doing is wrong, and you know that you shouldn't be doing it. But there's something that is inside you that you just can't tear yourself away from doing what you're supposed to be doing as a professional, because you enjoy yourself too much. And once you're over the initial, sort of, I feel a little bit ropey, but I've got to go and train. You want to just go out and do it again. And I was falling into a really, really sort of bad way of living my life. And inside, I was angry. And the way that I controlled that was by going out, meeting a load of mates, having a few beers and forgetting all about it. But just to wake up and be angry and be down again the next day.
It's like you're almost rebelling, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. It is.
Yeah.
I suppose that's exactly what it is, and that's where my mentality should have kicked in, and the grounding that I'd had at Manchester United with the wonderful coaches that I'd come up and worked with and worked through, and all the players that I played with as well, that obviously would have gone through the same thing, that didn't take the same route that I did. I probably just thought, you know what, bollocks to him. If he ain't going to pick me, then what's the point in me pulling my tripe out, because I've been doing it week in, week out, and he just continually leaves me out. So I may as well not sit there being depressed and worried about it, but rather than actually go and do something about it, I went the other way.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that, see, the start of the second season, you've quite obviously knuckled down and had a really good pre-season, because you start the first game of that new season against Hibs.
Yeah.
But then, from there, again, you disappear out of sight.
Yeah.
Why? Same case.
It would have been the same case. Yeah, it would have been the same case. I do remember, and I made a real point of, when I went away that summer, I made a real point of making sure that I came back in good shape. I came back having followed a little bit of a program that I'd set for myself over the summer, and it worked, because pre-season, I remember that pre-season was a doddle for me that year, and I really enjoyed it. And we started the season. I think we lost the game at Hibs.
That's right.
But I was in the starting lineup, and I wasn't too unduly worried. But then, like you said, it got to the stage where I wasn't being included. I didn't travel with the squad to play in the UEFA Cup. And
how gutting was that, not to play
massively?
In Europe?
Yeah, massively, because obviously I didn't play in Europe with Huddersfield, and the times that I actually travelled away in Europe with Manchester United before the injury happened, I was just going as like a part of a squad player to see what it was like, because I was still only sort of 17, 18, but it was a fabulous experience. But I never actually I did pull a shirt on, but never actually got onto the pitch for a European competition. Yeah. So to actually have contributed in the first season to Aberdeen finishing fourth behind Livingston, Celtic and Rangers, I was really excited about the prospect of going away and playing a European competition, both at Pittodrie and at somewhere that I'd never been before. I can't remember who it was, but it was the Backer Beyond that had a Z in it.
It was it was Nistro Oktir, I think they were called.
So was he Romanian or Moldovan or something like that?
Yeah, something like that. And then it was Hertha Berlin.
Yeah. And then Hertha Berlin as well. Yeah. A fabulous tie, which would have been brilliant for me. But in neither game was I included. And it subsequently dawned on me that my time at Aberdeen, I couldn't go through basically another season of doing what I'd done in the first season, especially when I'd worked so hard during pre-season. And the same repetition was starting to happen again. And I did actually, for the first time in 18 months, towards the end of that year in 2002, I went to Ebbe Skovdahl and I just said, listen, it's evident that, I'm not included in your plans. I wasn't even travelling away with the team for away matches in Scotland. So, and I was just being left at home to train on me, not on my own, but to train with one of the physios, and then just spend the whole weekend doing nothing. So what did I do? You know, I used to go out with the other lads that weren't involved in the squad or that were injured, and I'd just have a bit of a party weekend.
I think he personally, and I don't mean to speak ill of someone who's just passed away, but I think one of the biggest mistakes he made was giving you guys a day off on a Monday.
Massively. Absolutely massively. I've never understood that. I mean, at Man United, you never got a day off. You trained all day. And Sir Alex Ferguson, what he would do is he would sort of hand pick his players, maybe 2 or 3 at a time, and just say, you know, you're not going to play this weekend. Go and have, you know, 4 or 5 days in the sun, take your family away, spend time with your family, whatever. But it wouldn't be set in stone like it was at Huddersfield or Blackpool, whereas you'd train Monday, Tuesday, you'd have Wednesday off, and you'd come back in, you'd train Thursday, Friday, and you'd play on the Saturday. Ebbe, for some strange reason, which was brilliant for the players, because we'd play on a Saturday, we'd go out Saturday night, Sunday. We'd come in for a warm down on the Sunday. We'd all meet up at the cafe on Sunday lunchtime on the seafront, and then we'd just start drinking, and we'd go all the way through till, you know, Beck's Bar or wherever it was, till 2 o'clock in the morning, and then we'd have Monday off and you know, sort of barely make it out of bed before we'd go back in on a Tuesday. It was a very, very strange way of working it, and to this day, I've absolutely no idea why he opted to give us the Monday off. No idea why he did that. But it was definitely to my detriment, because that just gave me license to be able to have like a full weekend out partying.
Was there ever a time when the guys that weren't getting selected, or the guys who were injured, did you guys never sort of buddy up and discuss it, why you're not getting picked, what the issues were with the manager? And did you ever sort of encourage each other, or was it just, that was too taboo? You just get on with it, crack on with it?
No, I don't remember ever being in a situation like that. There might have been sort of odd times with the lads that I was very close to up there, like Preece, like Robbie Winters, like Jamie McAllister, that we might have had a bit of a tete-a-tete about it. But in terms of collectively as a group, it was never anything that we did, no. It wasn't anything that we did. At times, I would have bent John Sharp's ear, because I spent a lot of time with John and his family, and he was in the same boat as you were when you spoke to me just a few minutes ago. That he couldn't understand how somebody fresh face could come into a club, could actually pretty much hit the ground running, scored on his home debut, went on and scored a few more goals and contributed to the team performing really well, certainly up until that Christmas of 2001, but only being in the team after the first 6 games sporadically. He couldn't put his finger on it. And like I said, Ebbe Skovdahl, he was very much an individual, and as much as I enjoyed him and he made me laugh massively, he made us all laugh with some of the quotes that he used to come out with. His idiosyncrasies about the way football should be played was very, very different to what I was used to, and I didn't have the wherewithal to go and speak to him about it.
Was it a difficult conversation that you had with him when you said, right, maybe enough is enough? No,
it wasn't at all. I think that anything other than him agreeing with me would have really raised my eyebrows. And I went in and I just said, listen, if I could have 5 minutes of your time, I realised that, I'm not involved. I didn't ask him why on this occasion. It was too late for that, basically. I think I'd already made my mind up. I knew that there were a couple of clubs back down in England that would enable me to move back to where I was familiar with. Not that I didn't enjoy Aberdeen. My problem was I enjoyed Aberdeen too much. But the opportunity to maybe sort myself out, to be back close to my family, to be able to sort of reignite my footballing career again. I didn't want, as I said, to go through another full season at Aberdeen with just being either a bit part or not involved at all. That wasn't what I signed up for. So I said to him, listen, there are clubs that are interested in me, and come January the 1st or come December, in preparation for January the 1st, I'd like you to give me permission. I did it the right way. I didn't go behind his back. I would like to give I would like you to give me the permission to be able to speak to these clubs with a view to maybe moving away come the turn of the year. And he very, very simply said, yes, I don't have a problem with that. And that was it. He didn't say anything else. I continued to train. And my one regret is that I wasn't aware at the time that he was planning on moving on as well that Christmas. And Duncan Shearer and Steve Patterson were coming in as the managerial duo. And there was a very, very short window of about 3 or 4 days when they came in between Christmas and New Year, when I was sort of collecting all my stuff together and arranging my flat and what have you, where I went in and trained, because I was still contracted to them until the 1st of January before I went to Blackpool. And the first thing that Steve Patterson said to me was, I don't want you to go. You know, everybody gets a clean bill of health here. We start afresh. Ebbe Skovdahl, he's no more now. And I'd really like you to stay. But in the sort of crossover period just before Christmas, I'd gone home. He'd given me permission to go home, Ebbe Skovdahl, and sign for Blackpool. And it was only in those 3 or 4 days, he didn't tell me, and nobody else did either, that he was leaving and he wouldn't be here from the start of 2002. Otherwise, I would have stayed at Aberdeen, certainly until the end of that season in 2002. I would have stayed.
Okay. Oh, wow. Unbelievable. All right. Some quick fire questions. Who were the best players that you played with at Aberdeen?
In terms of technically gifted, and again, a really, really great lad that I hit it off with really well was Hisham.
Yeah.
And sadly, obviously a couple of years after I'd left, I learnt about his tragic passing. And I couldn't get to the funeral, but I was devastated. But I played in a game at Dundee, one of the very few away games that I actually started. And he scored a hat-trick. We beat him 4-1 at Dens Park. And he was unplayable that day. And when he wanted to, he could turn it on like nobody else. So in terms of God-given talent, Zero was absolutely brilliant. And I had a real sort of great relationship with him as well. Because I, like you with your German, mate, I spoke a little bit of French. So him and Rashid Belabed and Roberto Visconti when he came in, Eugene Daddy as well. We had a real sort of bond, if you like. I had a real bond with the French-speaking players, but Hisham definitely, I loved him. It was a real tragedy when he passed away. I was devastated for him.
Okay, if you could offer any advice to young lads who are going to sign for a club with big expectations on their shoulders to do well, what would you say to them?
Don't get too despondent if it doesn't quite go as well as you would have liked. Always have the belief in the ability that you've got, that you will succeed wherever you are. If you get the feeling that you would benefit by speaking to somebody, whether that be a teammate, whether that be somebody in the coaching staff, whether that be a member of your own family or a friend that you know you can confide in, just to give you a little bit of a pointer as to where you might just be missing that little element that will make you that player that you know that you are. All those things combined, as well as not heaping too much expectation on yourself, will help things improve dramatically. And obviously don't, take the avenue that I did and descend into rebelling, if you like, and turn into going out having a good time. It just doesn't work.
Okay, final question, mate. Do you still keep in touch with any of your former teammates?
Yeah, John Sharp has moved to Portugal. I keep in touch with him on social media, and I'm looking at seeing him when all this madness is over with the pandemic. Precy on social media. I've just had quite a few conversations with Jamie McAllister, who was unfortunately the victim of the shake-up at Bristol City, where he found himself out of work. But I can, if I ever wanted to speak to anybody or had the necessity to speak to any of them, then I wouldn't hesitate. I had a fantastic time at Aberdeen. Great city, great club. I always wish them well. Always a result that I look out for whenever they're playing. And although the regrets I've already spoken to you about, I have no regrets about signing for them. I absolutely love the place.
Brilliant, mate.
My thanks to Ben. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, but you did enjoy today's watch, please feel free to jump on board as we continue to build momentum here on Alibeg AB TV. Right, we are all done for episode 2 of The Vault. I really hope you enjoyed today's watch, and I will see you again very soon for a brand new edition of The Vault. See you soon.